Okay, so welcome everybody, especially our guest speaker today, Sarah May, to the, I think it's the fourth seminar of our autumn cycle of seminars in Digital and Public Humanities, organized by the Center for Digital and Public Humanities at the Department of Humanities at Swansea University. Thank you for everyone involved in organizing, especially Stefano Dallaglio, who will be arriving soon, and Elisa for also doing the technical support. You are also very much into today's topic, especially. So I think we invited Sarah May today on suggestion of Elisa and her work. This seminar is being recorded as we used to do, and then we will publish it on YouTube shortly after this event. So please be aware if you participate in discussions or in the chat. So this will be then published online on our YouTube channel. If you are interested in our activities, check our website or subscribe to our Instagram or Twitter account. We are have a presence on GitHub and everything. If Sarah you will use probably some slides. If you don't mind, we would share these slides on our GitHub website. And so we try to make all the materials as accessible as possible. That will be also part of your topic today. Any other instructions? So we will have a discussion where you can indicate that you want to participate or pose questions in the chat, and then I can moderate the following round of questions and discussions.
Oh dear.
If there are no further technical questions, organizational questions, I would now introduce today's guest speaker, Sarah May from Swansea University. Sarah is a senior lecturer in public history and heritage at Swansea University in South Wales. From an archaeology background, she has developed a particular interest in digital methods and worked in private, public, and academic contexts. For the last 20 years, her focus has been on heritage from a decisively contemporanean perspective and on what is called future-making practices in the heritage sector, with a particular interest in participatory approaches. Her activities include the Heritage for Transformation consultancy for community building, for example, on oral history projects on German prisoners of war camp, for example. She's doing research, design, and implementation of digital recording of archaeological field work, managing projects on famous World Heritage sites such as Stonehenge, Silbury Hill, the Hadrian's Wall, and other beautiful landscapes such as the Lake District. So I wish I would be following you on all your field works. Publications stretch over topics from heritage management to archaeology, from acoustic archaeology to difficult and toxic heritage. I think that today you will talk about opportunities and limits of using digital methods and communication for the democratization of cultural heritage. And the title of your talk today is Infrastructure, Skills, Voice, Digital Participation Beyond Access in Post-Industrial Heritage. So thank you very much, Sarah, for being here today. And yeah, the floor is yours. If you have slides, you can now share your slides.
Okie dokie, I shall share my slides. Thank you very much. I'm a little concerned that my connection isn't great. So let me know if you can't hear me. because
I put myself on mute, but if something happens, I will let you know. But so far, everything is fine. We see your slides and the
okay. And now, are you seeing my full screen now for my slides?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. It's great to hear about things I used to do in the before times when we used to be able to travel and do field work and things like that. But it's lovely to be here virtually with you all today. And thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to be able to sort of get feedback and discuss things with other people. What I'm going to be presenting today is very much me entering into a new phase of work. So it feels a little bit nerve-wracking because I can't tell you what works. I can only tell you what I'm thinking about. But I'm hoping that it will give you some perspectives on how the choices that we make in terms of the methods that we use make a difference to the kinds of work that our research can do in society and what we want from it. So that's the kind of framing of what I'm working on today. So I'm going to start in terms of what I'm going to be doing with giving you a little bit of context on the kind of area and the kind of heritage that I'd be working on. And then looking at what is meant by participatory heritage, what I mean by it and why it's important. And then I'll look in these three things that I mentioned in my title: infrastructure, skills, and voice, in terms of how they all work. That's the plan. Okay, so just to locate you, I am both living and working in South Wales at the little pin drop here. I live in Cardiff and I work in Swansea, where the pin drop is. Swansea was established as it was a medieval city, and it had Viking occupation and prehistoric occupation, but it became a full-on city really in the 19th century with the development of the copper industry in the valley. And this is an engraving from 1865 to show you the scale of the industry at that time. The reason for there being a copper industry in South Wales was not because of deposits of copper, but because of deposits of coal, because it takes 3 times the amount of coal by weight as copper by weight to produce copper from copper ore. Copper ore was shipped from around the world to Swansea, where there was a plentiful supply of coal to be produced into copper. And the copper industry in Swansea flourished from the mid-19th century until the mid-20th century, when it started to go into decline as the coal industry started to go into decline and other sources of energy were beginning to be used in the smelting. So that by the late 1960s, the industry was essentially dead. So from the late 1960s and it dragged on into the 1980s, leaving behind it a substantial toxic landscape, which needed to be remediated before anything could be done with it at all. But by the early 2000s, the city was keen to try and regenerate this area, and as in many places around Europe, use the framework of heritage as a lever for that regeneration. So I'm just going to try and get this to, I don't know whether I may need to stop my share and restart it again. I just want to give you a sense of what the place was like in 1963.
Pit heads of coal mines, most now abandoned, the chimney stacks of deserted steel and copper works and derelict smelters.
Now it's gone.
In 1960, this was the largest area of industrial dereliction in Europe. Relics of the mighty industrial past lay crumbling and forgotten. Endless tips of mineral waste and slag almost completely covered the original floor of the valley.
proprio controllo al massimo.
Okay. I'm going to stop that there, partly because the sharing isn't going very well, and also because you get the sense of what I'm talking about, right? So we have a substantial amount of, in terms of the heritage, the context, the heritage that I'm working in, we're looking at a heritage of an industry which was remarkably damaging to the community. And then, of course, as in all circumstances of industrialization, of deindustrialization, the lack of the industry was also damaging to the community. So you have a community where there isn't work, and you also have a community where the land has been substantially damaged. So that's the context in which heritage of regeneration is taking place. So if I continue on, so this is now the image for regeneration that the City Council has. And in particular, they're intending to work with a distillery to put a whiskey tour in amongst the buildings that were part of the original copperworks, which has its own difficulties in terms of the way that whiskey heritage and industrial heritage go together, but we won't be discussing that so much today. But these are the kinds of images that the city has, that we're looking for modern, we're looking for relatively clean and wealthy, and these kinds of images like that. And heritage is part of that. Now, in between the time in '63 and the regeneration plans today, the city in which people were living, one of the main things that this area was in fact used for was for raves, for illegal dancing and drinking parties and other kinds of behavior that sits outside of the kinds of controlled life that the city now expects for it. So young people in particular were using this area for all the kinds of illegal and semi-legal activity that young people need space in cities for. So the regeneration moves to take away that space within the city, that liminal space, and make it a controlled space again. This image here, which I've got the heading there, coming home stripey, in addition to things like raves, the river, which as you saw in the other video, is heavily polluted, was still a focus for swimming for young people throughout this period, despite the fact that it was heavily polluted. And one of my participants said to me that, you weren't meant to swim in the river, but your parents would always know that you'd been swimming in the river because you'd come home stripy, by which she meant that the pollution had left lines on your body, which your family could see. So you'd be in a bit of trouble, but it didn't stop people, right? So although it was a heavily polluted and slightly dangerous place, it was also an important place for people who grew up in Swansea through this time. And it continues to have that. And so there is a bit of pressure between, this is a thing I called the Musgrave Engine House ? The Musgrave, the engine house was one of the main technical aspects of the copper smelting, and so that's what the building is named after. It's named after its function in the copper smelting, but it's been used, as you can see by the graffiti on it, as a place for people for the last 40 years that has nothing to do with that copper heritage. So when we think about this place in the centre of Swansea, we're thinking about a place that has important heritage industrially and has important heritage for the people who live there that isn't necessarily industrial. And then it has an intended future from the council that brings it back within the control and the economic powerhouse that it originally was. So it's in this context that Swansea University has been working in the copper works for the last 10, 15 years, and other people, other colleagues other than myself have been doing this work, and they have been in the last 5 to 10 years having a strong focus on public engagement, placemaking, the kinds of things that many people are keen to see heritage doing, and particularly this idea of heritage-led regeneration. So I'm going to try once again to give you another short film clip to give you a sense of how that work runs. Okay, that's shared now, yes?
Yes.
Okay. You may notice that these images, those images are from a 3D model. It's supposed to film.
Two lonely chimneys standing up high, full of lots of memories.
Lots of the children don't know about the history of the Havard, so we felt it was a chance for them to find out a bit of history on the doorstep. And it's just bringing it alive to the children. It's amazing in a few weeks that the knowledge they've got, they've applied it to song and singing and ICT. So it's just been a great opportunity for them.
You are learning, it's hard work and you're tired and you're sweating. But if you think about it, you're actually contributing to history, like you're actually doing something really interesting.
Isolated from the world, identities were taken so post to work all the day, cooperate or you will
I think it's kind of important to remember these kind of things and understand where we came from and how the modern world was built, you know. So there's so many lessons out there that you can kind of pick out of it.
vanished in the fire, lost their life's desire. All the hills were crying out, copper on the lake.
Because I didn't really know much history.
I knew that they were a thing.
Yeah.
I didn't know what.
Didn't know how big. I didn't know they were that
Yeah.
big. I didn't think they were
Copper. Most of the
producers,
world's copper.
Yeah.
High, no birds flying there, there's poison in the sky. Gold from the dark, fire in the light. Copper ore melted down every day and night.
Okay, so you can see that they've made, in the work that my colleagues have already been doing, there's been a lot of attempts to draw in the community, particularly through children and schools, and this whole education-based model of how we might communicate heritage. So that and that I think has been really quite successful in a lot of important ways, and it's on that I'm trying to build. But it is also a slightly different perspective on what heritage can do, and it makes it difficult for us to deal with that that middle space between the industry and today, because the official kinds of narratives that that are encouraged through education are very much about the importance of the industry and how it gave the identity to the community, and not so much about how the community itself dealt with the challenges between the industrial period and today. So I want to now, the work that I'm proposing to do and that I've put in grant applications, hopefully will be successful, is more based in the concept of participatory heritage. Now, participatory heritage is not equivalent to community heritage. It's not simply, as we've said in the, as was in the video that you just looked at, engagement, where we define the heritage and then engage other people in those stories. And it's not about, it's not about being a heritage-led process. It's about being a community-led process or a participant-led process, so that so that the direction of the research, the direction of the methods, the outcomes are all led by the people who are involved in the project themselves. And one of the reasons that I'm very keen to use participatory heritage in this context is because of the fact that in this post-industrial context, so many people have been excluded from the kinds of narratives that are driving the development of their cities, that it's important to conduct your heritage in such a way that you address that exclusion, because that's actually the most important social factor that heritage can contribute to at the moment. So the success is very much, success or failure of a project is very much defined on the terms that the participants are interested in seeing. And so often the outcomes are skills-based, they're about well-being, they're about creativity, they're about developing connections between other people. It's possible there will also be new knowledge about the heritage. It's also possible that there will be things where the heritage is sustained or improved in some way. But it is, the main purpose is to improve the engagement of people who want to participate in heritage and offer them that situation. So that gives us a different challenge with how we might use digital methods in relation to these things. And that's really what I'm going to talk about for the rest of this talk, is about how in this context, what kinds of digital issues are there? What kinds of things do we need to take into account when we're planning how to use them in the projects? So I'm contrasting this image, which is from the website of not the project that's just finished, but the project before that by the university, where someone says this was, a most interesting visit with informed guides. And for me, it brought back happy memories when I started work at the site in 1960. So here's somebody who actually worked in this place, but they're still being treated as a guest. They're still being guided by someone else. And the image that this quote is being put on top of people walking outside a fence on a path, for me, this is very much the kind of engagement model of heritage, a heritage-led regeneration model, which has its benefits, but it also means that the ways in which people conceive of this as their heritage are much more limited. So I'm going to dive straight into the things that we need to think about when we think about using digital methods for participatory archaeology. And the first one is infrastructure. So the raw figure is that 89% of people in Wales have access to the internet. I'm sorry, that it's an autocorrect. Internet, not intranet. Be a big intranet. 89% of people in Wales have access to the internet. And of course, the Welsh government is pleased about that figure. That seems like a nice high figure, but that's 11% of people who don't have any access to the internet. And given that the internet is now absolutely required for everything from at a moment going to school to applying for jobs, doing jobs, those 11% of people not having access to the internet is quite important. Also, it's important to remember that that the access to the internet very much varies in quality in terms of the Wi-Fi and broadband bandwidth that people have, but which I was discussing with the people before we started. If you have 6 students in a student house and they all are trying to use the same broadband to access their classes, we all know that can be a challenge. And this is very much also case for people who aren't necessarily at university. One family may need to share a single device for their access to the internet, and where children are being required to use it, the idea that somebody is going to be able to take that family device to use it for a heritage project is really not a reasonable example. Also, very much there's a variability on what kinds of devices people are using. Most people who are using the internet in Wales an awful lot of it is with mobile phones, which have great affordances for some things, but it does mean that you can't expect people to necessarily be producing material using phones. So the scale of digital engagement is going to be limited by the kinds of devices that are available to people. And everything like this, as with so many other things, has been impacted by the pandemic, so that people's access to the infrastructure for digital materials is worse now than it was, and more important now than it was. So that combination of it being under greater pressure at the same time as being less available. Now, some of the people that we've been working with in developing the project that I've put in the grant for have been working in these communities, trying to get laptops, old laptops that people don't need anymore, trying to distribute them throughout the community and try to deal with the baseline infrastructure problem. So one of the things that we need to think about then in terms of planning participatory heritage is that we need to make sure that actually these projects increase the access to the infrastructure for people, for participants, especially if we're going to be using digital methods, that actually it's one of the key things that we have to do when we're planning our projects. And we can't assume that participants can access resources of their own accord. So that infrastructure may in fact be one of the needs driving the project, more than, say, the state of a building or whether or not people know a story. Is, do they actually have the access to the infrastructure that they need for participating as citizens today? So this image is just to show some of the circumstances in which really, when we say 89% of the people in Wales have access to the internet, that includes things like people using the internet at local libraries, and local libraries, of course, have been shut during the pandemic. And of course, even when they're open, the flexibility that you have when you're using a resource that's only available in a public library that you don't have access to for yourself, that's going to make a big difference to how you can engage and how much that feels like yours and how much it feels like something that belongs to someone else. So moving on then to the question of skills. So obviously the problems with infrastructure undermine skills. It's difficult to develop skills when you don't have devices and you don't have access to the internet. And so there's a big variability in digital skills that is consequent on that. So for instance, where there have been problems with children not being able to access the digital materials that schools have been sending home through the pandemic, schools have been sending home paper versions of the same work. And that's really going to make a bigger skills gap as a result, because not only do you not have access, but you also then haven't learnt the skills that the children who have been remotely accessing their work through things like Google Classrooms, or these kinds of things. So that in addition to the problems with infrastructure, we will have a much wider skills gap at the end of the pandemic. Where there is IT education as part of secondary education, it's very strongly focused on this notion of employability. What can you do to get a job? So using industry standard software and very much focused on word processing and spreadsheets, these kinds of employability skills. So it can be quite difficult in that context to develop creativity, which is, of course, a much more important and more high-level skill that people have when they're thinking about the use of digital methods in heritage. So the skills, as we said, as you saw in the video that I showed, are a major draw for participants, even in engagement-based projects. One of the strong reasons that people want to get involved in heritage projects is because they want, as they say, to do something important and to learn some new skills. And in that context, informal learning is also really important. And it's more, and heritage projects are one of the circumstances in which people can learn informal and more creative digital skills. So just as infrastructure may be driving a heritage project, so is this real need for people to be able to just mess around with digital systems. So I'm just drawing an image back to the video of showing how this is clearly not digital skills, but the repointing of the wall that the people in this project are learning how to do is one of the things that's really drawn people to being involved in the project. If you had said to them, well, you'll learn about the building, this group of people would have felt that that was really not for them. But if you learn how to do something, that's something that's much more likely to draw them in. So for people who are excluded from the kinds of heritage projects that may be running from an authority-based position, a skills offer is a big draw. And I want to go on to this last element that I mentioned, this notion of voice. So a lot of the digital outputs of projects that I've been involved in over the years very much foreground the voice of the academic. So although you may have engaged people from outside academia in the research and report on their views, the voice that's driving things remains the academic voice. And whenever we think about the engagement with digital methods, then all those things that I've just mentioned about infrastructure and skills makes a big difference about who can actually speak. So if you think about the film editing in the video clip that I showed about the previous work, one of the things that initially sparked this project is that the research assistant on that project, Tracy Evans, said she was really aware when she was making that video that she was the person editing it. So although the camera was trained on participants, it was her decision always about who to include, who not to include, where to cut them off, what kinds of angles to add in. And those kinds of details of the skills that are required to get into those kinds of details makes a big difference to the voice of the heritage that you're creating. So similarly, again, that film clip made a lot of use of a 3D model that had been made of the site. And I would query about how we can use 3D models in this circumstances, because it's as I was saying here, totalizing in Cartesian. It's one of those things where an awful lot of funders will say, a 3D model, that's something that we can use. But who is it that is going to be using it? Is it something where participants are going to be accessing it to make their own statements about the past? Or is it going to be something that shows the complexity of work without necessarily drawing in the participants who are the focus? The same kind of thing can happen with regard to citizen science style projects, of which there are a large number in the UK at the moment, based in heritage, where people are given an opportunity to contribute to an academic agenda rather than to lead that academic agenda, so that people essentially become data entry specialists rather than actually engaging in heritage. Harold Fredheim has written about this in a broader context. So this is really very much an extractive model of how people will participate. And that's something we all are aware of when we think about digital systems, because especially where we're using industry standard, because the extractive model is built into some of the ways in which that technology has been designed. So then, we have to ask then, whose song is it that we're singing when we're making these kinds of this kind of work? So our plans, the work that I've put in with colleagues who are in Linnaeus University in Sweden and at NICU in Norway, we've been developing plans to do participatory work in this context. And the main thing that I think is really important to consider is as much money as possible into participant-led activities. And that's really difficult because most of our funding models, as all of you I'm sure are too well aware, are very much about getting money into universities. So getting any of that money out of the university and into the community is really difficult. But if you don't get the money into the community, then you are stuck with an extractive model. So what our plans and our grant includes things like childcare for participants, local travel costs for participants, accessibility to do with any kind of disability issues that participants may have, translation issues. If you're trying to incorporate multicultural diversity, you need to make sure that everybody has the capacity to follow and understand. So money that's going into that. So that makes a challenge for developing new digital resources, because obviously if we're trying to get the money out into the community, then we're not putting the money into development. And then there are also slightly tricky issues around managing infrastructure. So we have made sure that we have included a fair amount of laptops and other devices in our bid, but actually making sure that those are accessible to participants and not simply something that sits in our cupboards, but at the same time is something that we can still manage and make sure that they don't just go into someone else's cupboard. Those are issues that we'll need to work through. We've also very much tried to leave the tech questions open until we're actually working with participants so that we can be led by them on what skills they want to develop. So we might well use film and we almost certainly will use film as a core technology. We'll also be doing sonic and audio work. We may well use 3D printing to try and make some of the materials that are, say, in museums and not accessible to people more accessible. But we very much want to be led by what it is that our participants are asking for. That makes it a bit difficult for project planning, because we're saying, well, these are the things we might do, but I want to be flexible to be able to meet the needs of the people who are working in the project. Obviously then, because of the fact that we're not able to develop much in the way of new resources, because we're trying to get work into the participant-led activities, I want to be using the materials that exist, like the 3D model that I showed, like some of the other kinds of digital resources that have already been made for the site. But we need to think about how, if we start with that as the baseline, then the people who are creating their heritage with us in the project may feel that the decisions have already been made. So these are questions that we've tried to work through in our bid, and hopefully we'll be able to work through if we're successful. But also I bring them up because I hope they're things that you may think about in your work, and you may have some suggestions about how these things can be addressed. So thank you very much. This the last image is just from on one of the university campuses, one of the Swansea campuses. It's an art installation that is somehow relating to the industrial history of the town, although in some ways it's an interesting enough thing to do to have art installations on university campuses, this is very much what I want to avoid. I want to avoid this idea that we can turn the industrial heritage into some abstract piece of art that's held away on the university campus and not part of the lives of the people whose heritage it actually is. So that's all that I have to say for now. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. So this was very instructive for everyone who is considering to go into this direction, and it makes things much more complex, not easier, and a lot of things to consider. So thank you very much. I'm sure there will be a question from the audience. So everyone is invited now to either post a question into the chat, or I think we are a group not too big. If you have trouble typing into the chat, you can also turn on your microphone and speak directly. Otherwise, just leave your name in the chat and I can give you then voice.
May I? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
oh,
please,
thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. I found your research very interesting, especially for the interplay that you are able to create between digital methods, communication, and participation. So it seems simple, but I know that creating engagement with a citizen science approach is very, very complicated, a complicated work to do, especially during this period, this pandemic period. So I have a consideration first, maybe then a question, but I start with a consideration. I'm talking to you from an archaeological point of view. I'm happy to discuss about the landscapes in which we live and engagement, especially now, 20 years from the European Landscape Convention, as you know, in which landscape characteristics result from the action of natural and human factors and their interrelations, interplays. So heritage is this relation that each of us has with our own cultural and natural heritage. Considering it as the foundation of our own identity. And it is a whole of assets that we have inherited from the past and that we must pass on to future generations. And the landscape is the son of the society that produce it. And now we can see with you which ways in past industrial cities people may experience from their own past. And I'm wondering what values are associated with heritage in our futures, maybe.
Just discussing the relationship between heritage and landscape and the ways in which that cultural and natural landscapes come together and European Landscape Convention. So that's where I was. So if you can...
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
The question is just the value. What do you think about the future generation? The value associated with heritage in our future. So if you have an idea, or what do you think from your perspective?
Okay, well, that is that whole notion about how does heritage, how is the value of heritage for future generations is one of the issues that was that I have been working on with a project called the Heritage Futures Project for the last 5 years, really, and we've only recently published the monograph of that, which you can also look at as well. But my own perspective on that, having been working on it for the last 5 years, is that the importance of heritage for people today is where our focus should lie. That, as you said about the European Landscape Convention, that the ways in which that we situate ourselves with regard to cultural and natural heritage, the practices that we use to understand the past and to understand ourselves vis-a-vis the past, are really important and are really under-resourced. And when we say that we're going to do this for the future, then we take our eye off the ball of the present. People in the future, just like we do today, will make their own pasts. They'll make their own heritage out of what they've got, in the same way that we have, right? So it's not to say that we should be going and trashing things. Yeah, I'm not saying that we should just get rid of everything, but that we should really be making sure that it's the needs of today that's met. If we meet the needs of people today with regard to heritage, that will be something that contributes to the well-being of the future generations, because we will have been in a strong enough position to leave them the best landscape that we can. So I don't know if that helps. Is that a useful response?
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much. Yeah.
More questions?
May I add something?
Diego, please.
I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah,
you're a bit low, but in principle, yes.
Better now?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay, so I was using headset because other people were doing some other online activity at house as usual. So thank you very much for the presentation, Sarah. I really like it. And there is something that is popping up in my mind, absolutely related your last answer, the present, and related to this, the body of the participants. So since what you presented, it seems to me that everything is related to the heritage of that part is very related to bodily experience, very strong bodily experience. In the past, working with the coal, working in the smelting production, and also all that was around being dirty, being polluted, the air. And after that, the decline of it, so the video that we saw about the 1965, so the decay and so on. Again, the body with the rave party and so on. So how are you working on putting together the digital experience with the bodily experience of the community? So in this very the present heritage, the experience of the people getting into making something, having also different bodily experience by group, by generation, sometimes are quite hard then to make this experience in a spreadsheet, in nice pictures, convey that experience in digital products. So how are you working on that?
Okay, well, thanks for that question. It's a very difficult part, and it's and you're quite right. This is one of the reasons why I've wanted to leave the actual details of what we do technologically till we have people that we're working with, because that is one of the really key things is that the experience of this place is not an intellectual experience, it's a bodily experience. So some of the earlier work that people have been doing, whether it be, you know, repointing the walls, or the one of the things that was sort of in the clip there about actually making one of the cranes of the old industry workable again. So actually learning how to do the kind of work that people did used to do work on that site. Those kinds of embodied experiences are what participants will be interested in getting. Whether that is possible to get through in a digital method, to express in terms of communication, I have seen some examples where people have done it, particularly, again, it's about this skills and voice thing. If you're actually making sure that the outputs are expressing the experience in a nuanced way, then some of that comes across. But it is very difficult to get across. Some of the things that our IT colleagues have been suggesting, I think, have worked in the opposite direction. So they have a suggestion of a thing where you could, a thing they call, a project they call Telescoper, which was, you know, like a seaside telescopes that you put a coin in and you can look through. Yes. They had one of these, but it was a virtual reality model that you could look out over if you looked at this, which I can understand. They were trying for virtual reality. They were hoping for these kinds of things, but it deliberately extracting people from the experience, the bodily experience that we're talking about. And similarly, I think that's one of the real challenges with using the 3D models, because when we do this sort of fly through that you saw in the thing, that people don't fly, people don't fly in a space like this. They walk, they dance, they build, they carry. And so I'm kind of, in a way, I don't have a good answer, to be honest. I recognize the challenge in it, and I'd be very happy to hear any kinds of suggestions that anybody had about how to work with that. But it's one of the reasons why I'm a little reluctant to use some of the higher end kinds of digital methods that some of my other colleagues have been using in this circumstance.
Yeah, no, I'm agree with you with this idea that the virtual reality that seems the easiest and also the most technological answer that we can use it is very distancing, and it is absolutely top-down answer because you present something that is academically taught, that is academically taught in terms of interpreting how it works and so on, but there is behind the realization of these products real a need that is us, that is something that we share, that we put in our fancy journal, but it is something that should not be a common heritage. A common heritage may be, something that happened, legends, urban myth, or whatever it was, this place during the industrial times and after and so on. So it is absolutely a challenging thing. So no, I was asking because in a similar project, I had to answer similar questions. So how to bring the community out in their emotion, because the problem is the emotion. So how to detect the emotion and how let the emotion speaks. It is quite easy, or at least it seems quite easy, if you have a medieval age cathedral or a castle or whatever, because okay, it is part of our Western heritage, and we think that at least we can use some emotion linked to that quite easily. But with something that is so vibrant and present, we have to rewrite our way to present also the digital tools that we want that the public will engage with, because yes, we run the risk to be top-down proposing things. So collect the photo that are relevant to you, but the photo is something that we as heritage scholar, we need to collect, to have data, to be a little bit more systematic and so on. Maybe the absence also of things. So we study what I want to say, that we are very keen with the presence. We found this, we found the train, we found an old smelting place, we found stuff. Sometimes the connection with the heritage, with this kind of heritage, is in its absence. In that place, there was a place where my grandfather and his fellows were used to go and drink a beer after work, and now it isn't anymore. So the absence of the thing. So it is not easy to put together the emotion flow and the more classical heritage approach, where we put in line stuff, things, buildings, and whatever. Yeah. So another annotation that I liked very much what you said about the devices and the access of technology, that it is something that we take for granted, and we can say everyone has, but no, absolutely. Also, the ownership of your own device or not is something that I never thought about, and I pointed it out, down, because it is very useful to think about that when you are proposing people to do something without asking if they are do with the phone, with a PC, a tablet, whatever, and asking it is your property or not. It changed a lot. The contribution that they can that they could give you, or that they could give to the project. Thank you for that insight very much.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad that's helpful. Yeah.
Further questions from other participants? If not immediately, so I would be interested in getting a clearer picture about the relationship academic research and participatory heritage Well, I don't know what is it. So engagement with something that is out of control of academics. So usually we as academics, and I'm happy to be an academic, and I like to be led by academics who know what they are talking about. So we find the topic, and then we open the gates, and everything is out of control. I very much like this approach. But so how do we bring this together? And is it? I mean, choosing the subject is already so. We should start from the very beginning if we are consequent in this approach and say, okay, community, what is your heritage? And then we build a project around this. Maybe nobody's, it's not the case, but maybe nobody's interested in the copper industry. They are interested in the river, in the dirt river, and what happens to their bodies at the time when they have been swimming in it. And the rest is maybe less important. Maybe it's more about the graffiti of 5 years ago and the new name tag that has been added to that graffiti, and by groups in the city. I don't know. It should be in a way the decision of the community to choose the subject or what is heritage. But still, of course, we have this aim to connecting people with what we think is worthwhile to know and experience in the best possible way with our bodies, with our minds, with our intellect. So I'm not sure. So how to bring this together? Of course,
how to balance it. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe you thought about it a lot. I think. So
yeah. Yes. This is so. Yes, what you described in the first section there is very much the way that we have planned to be working in this circumstance. That it is down to the people who want to get involved to tell us what they want to get involved with, what it is that they think as the place as their heritage. What is it that is it? There will be some people who will want to, as you say, look at the copper industry. There'll be other people who do want to look at the graffiti, and there'll be other people who want to look at everything. And I think that the way that fits with my understanding of what my role as an academic is to facilitate that, to support them with skills, but to also encourage them to understand, as Elisa was saying, about understanding the concept of landscape, and that notion that it's theirs to decide is actually there in the way that our heritage legislation is constructed. That the perception that it's down to us to tell them what's important isn't actually the way that heritage policy is framed. It's just the way that it's actually enacted most of the time, you know. So there will be people as well who are interested in the kinds of things that we value, that have been valued traditionally by academics. After all, we value them. So there will be other people who value them as well. It's not like that we say that stuff isn't valuable. But the academic question is, what do people value? And what does letting them value that, supporting them in their exploration of that, what does that produce? How does that change our relationship with the heritage? So those are the kinds of academic questions that we're asking, and some of this is built on practice in participatory arts, which very much has this kind of perspective already, where people, that you don't say I'm going to make a sculpture, you say I'm going to work with a group of people in a participatory arts project, and let's see what we produce. Yeah, and the process is the key. I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, thank you. More questions, suggestions, or connections to other fields? I mean, you mentioned art project, of course. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So. I see nothing in the chat. So do you have suggestions for people like us, academics, who want to embark on a project of this type. I mean, it's more and more a requirement in grant proposals. So if we want to play the game, this is definitely so a buzzword at the minimum, but it's really so people get more and more into this and the values of these approaches. So that could be useful, maybe. You have some suggestions here.
Well, I suppose that the most important one is the one that Diego already flagged, is to think about the fact that do not take for granted what digital infrastructure people have. Yeah. That when we're planning digital projects, we have to, to meet what the infrastructure that is of your intended participants or your intended audience. And that especially where you're going to say that you're going to be working with people who are disenfranchised, to be aware that their digital access is going to be pretty limited. So that's really number one. And then number two is that that when the point that you made about how it's about making it so that it's not just our perspective that's coming through in these things, and that is again. If we go for something like virtual reality, which we like to do because it looks well for funders as well, when you're saying playing the game, that it has within it, that kind of approach has within it restrictions which will keep you from getting the kinds of impact that you say that you're going to have. And I suppose then I feel like I'm saying it to everybody all the time at the moment, but it always comes down to money. It comes down to money for us, but it also comes down to money for the people that we're working with. And if you have a situation where your organization is making loads of money off working with people who don't have any money, that there's an inequality in that, which is always going to it's going to always restrict what you can actually do in your research. And that if you want to work with people, you have to work with them, and that includes making sure that the money gets out there. So that's whether or not we'll actually be able to do that, whether or not it's possible to make funding bodies respond to that kind of need, I don't know, to be blunt. But I think as long as the money is always coming into the university, and then what you have to ask yourself, what's going out into the community if we say that we're doing this for impact for the community, etc. So that's perhaps a long road. I don't know.
Yeah, so my experience with Italian administration, it's not so easy to spend money in that way. So I mean, there is a lot of regulations so to prevent corruption, of course, but this is not very helpful if you want to reach out to communities and support also financially project with the public. So that's difficult for us. So Diego has a lot of experience here, and Elisa. You would probably confirm, so I don't know.
Yeah, it is absolutely one of the our biggest problem in terms of bringing in the same place academic research and people and community, because if we do that, we have to find other way to have not use the whole money, the project money, but for example in one project I had to do that, so I planned, Elisa came sometimes, I had an archaeological project. They want to have people drinking in the actual excavation, so have a aperitif in the actual excavation inside, and after the drinking speaking about archaeology. So the idea was to reverse the idea of a lecture, that you have before the lecture and then you have the glass of wine. No, let's start with a glass of wine. Let's have everyone chilled in a nice place, the middle of the lagoon and so on. And then I will start to tell you a little bit of pieces of what we are doing in the excavation right now. for doing that, I was forced to use other money, so to use support of other funding body, not the official one of the project, because the EU project didn't allow me to spend money on alcohol, for example, or didn't allow me to have this kind of interaction. But I think that and of course, what I was interested were not what I was telling to the people, but which were the questions that came after. So which were the bottom up question. My experience in that is that it is easily when you interact with the people. So when you have the physical presence. So because in there, of course, there is a little bit of infrastructure that you organize, but if you are pretty open as you organize it, you let the different communities speak their voices. I have a little bit more problem when it comes digitally. So when you have a media in between you, the public, and the heritage that you are speaking with, because what I've seen so far, it seems that the community tend to answer if they have technological skills, and then they tend to mimic whatever is already prepared. So they tend to answer, say, okay, I can do a video myself, I can do present myself. So they don't go for other direction in unexpected. So sometimes the digital can be frustrating in that way, but probably because I'm not very good at using it, and so I have to think more on how to work with that and how to present also to the community. And then the other thought that I have in my mind in these projects, that of course we need as academics to record what is happening. Otherwise, we don't have material on what we build up our researches, data, and maybe also our paper, because let's say things are like they are. The fact that we are recording and we are pulling a lot of energy in trying to distillating, we are putting ourselves outside the happening, and we run the risk to lose the happening and the real significance of heritage, how is happening, if we weren't so thinking that we have to record what is happening. So it is a tricky, it is a tricky role that we have in these participatory schemes, but it is a challenge that we have to embrace fully at all. So I think that with this approach, we can really also challenge a little bit. I'm speaking as Italian, Sarah, with all the Roman, pre-Roman, medieval heritage that are so big, so heavy in our shoulders, so that maybe we can also challenge this idea that heritage is linked with the past, in terms of if it is more ancient, more is ancient, more is important, or more is shiny, more is merry, and so on, and go for a contest of heritage where it's possible also to leave things be rotten and enjoy them without have to restore everything, and let things also have their material life through their death or whatever it is. So not so being focused, again, as Italian, restoring, preserving for the future, as we said before.
Do you think that collective memory, choose things for video, choose things instead of other things, is a way to change, is a way to manage the past, is a way to to change the story for the future?
I definitely think so, and I will come to that in a second, because it does relate partly to my response to what Diego was just saying, which I think is really interesting. Your point about that when you put the digital mediation in it, that people's responses become less creative, that they become more like the thing that they've already been given, and I think that that's a big challenge for using digital methods, is that people feel they have to do the same thing they've seen other people do. And I think it's because of lack of confidence, right? And that's what I was saying about that, the education is around the employability skills. So like people feel they have to do the right thing because someone's given them the technology, so they have to do it the technological way. So where if you're speaking to them as you're describing in your work and you're listening, there's a human connection there, and they don't feel they're performing and that they have to be perfect. And I think one of the things there is that one of the things we can do, and that I have seen done very effectively, and I've done a little bit myself, is allowing yourself to fail, right? To instead of doing the shiny 3D model which we fly over, it might be better to have a bunch of sketches and some photography that's just on a phone, and the lower tech stuff that kind of makes people feel like they still have a way to engage with that, and it's not the perfect. Then that makes people have an entrance way, I think. That in relation to your question, Elisa, about how these kinds of selections do influence the story that we tell for the future, I'm increasingly of the opinion, and this is a bit of a side from what I was talking about today, but it does relate, that in a way that heritage is a practice. If we think of heritage as a practice rather than as a set of material, right? So it's the way in which we engage with the past. It's the way in which we use the past in the present. And we may well, the practice operates on material, and it operates on intangible stuff, and it operates on a number of different things, right? So that process of selecting, deciding what we're going to take photographs, deciding what we're going to restore, that's the heritage. The heritage practice is the decision and the actions that we do with it. So we can, if we bring people into that they're doing heritage practice, then they're part of what those stories are. But one of the social roles of heritage, one of the reasons that we get funding, is because in that selection, we make a negotiation in change. When we say, this thing here, this is valuable, and it can go off into the future. And this thing here, it's not so important, we can let it go. And this other thing here is actually really dangerous. We're going to get rid of it. We're not going to think about it. And that is actually a process. That selection process is something that has happened again and again, not just since we called ourselves heritage professionals. So I recently was talking about I think we're looking at that in relation to, say, monastic remains in Britain. So the medieval in Britain has got a very different kind of way that it gets managed in terms of heritage than in Italy, because of the dissolution of monasteries, right? So you have a situation where you've got something which is really powerful, the monastic land holding, right? And then you get a change, a political change with the dissolution of the monasteries in the English Reformation, right? And then at that point, they're deliberately ruined as part of the English Reformation. The ruination of those buildings is politically mandated. So somebody then has made a decision, this stuff is dangerous, we're going to get rid of it, but the land is valuable, we're going to hold on to that, and we're going to make sure that land comes through. The stories then that get told, then that gets transferred into this idea of a romantic past that is no longer dangerous, no longer politically dangerous. So it's these ways in which that heritage acts to make change safe for the people who are paying us, without being too cynical.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I completely agree with you.
Okay, if there are no further comments, so I very much like the idea of Diego to start with an aperitivo before an actual seminar. Maybe, I hope we will be able to do it sometimes. Still, having an aperitivo after a seminar is attractive as well, but not possible under the current situation. So that's all a shame, but we are nevertheless very happy to have you had you as a guest here with this very interesting insight into heritage practice, where we can all learn a lot from communities and from ourselves. So thank you very much indeed.